Hold on a minute. It's that time again. It's Baggy Hi-Fi time. Greetings cats and kittens, once again welcome to Baggy Hi-Fi, this YouTube channel devoted to record collecting and the vinyl community here in the UK. How are you doing? I hope everyone is keeping well. We're now well over a week into lockdown, and this evening I went to the supermarket for the first time in a few days, and things have changed. You have to now queue up until enough people have left the shop. If you want petrol, you have to wear plastic gloves, and at the tills as well there are now protective screening for the people that work on the counters. So yeah, things are getting very, very strict. Someone I know likened this situation now to being like being in a post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie, and yeah, it does feel very strange, even though I think we're all kind of getting used to, in a sense, this strangeness. So as I say, I hope you're all looking after yourselves and you're keeping well. Now this latest video, this latest episode of Baggy Hi-Fi, I thought I'd concentrate on just one record label and maybe just show just some examples of albums released on that label. I don't know whether anyone else is doing this on the vinyl community, and if so, then please point me in that direction, because I'd be interested. Because especially with independent labels, I think thinking back to, say, Factory Records or certain other of the early independent labels, they had a particular distinctive sound, or perhaps a distinctive style. I'm thinking with Factory Records, you know, the Peter Saville designed sleeves on the releases. So today I'm going to talk about a record label that existed, founded in 1987 by Mark Kramer, and it was defunct by 1998, and it's an American independent label called Shimmy Disc. Well, if you're unfamiliar with the label Shimmy Disc, then please be assured I'm not trying to be super hip by talking about a record label that you maybe have never heard of. I'm just, if you haven't heard of it, then I do, you know, encourage you to investigate some of the music that was released on Shimmy Disc, because over the course of between 1987 and 1998, I think that label released some very, very interesting experimental, psychedelic tinged music, but the artists that Kramer signed to that label were very varied. But I think what groups them together is that they were very sort of quirky and eccentric music. Mark Kramer himself sort of first came to knowledge by music fans when he played a stint as a bass player for the Butthole Surfers, and thinking about the mid-80s, and then he went to join Shockabilly, which were a very strange trio that included Eugene Chadbourne. Yeah, so Eugene Chadbourne, there's a name to conjure up with. Chadbourne still very much performing around on the avant-garde circuit. If you do see any of his albums, I would pick one up to possibly an acquired taste. Eugene Chadbourne is well known for playing at times banjo, yeah, but also electrified rake. There's one of his albums, one of his solo albums, just as an aside there, but I just wanted to show it because it has that beautiful painting by cartoonist Gary Panter there. And I do have some Shockabilly albums, but I don't know where they are at the moment. I have to track them down. So yeah, so in 1987, Kramer founded the record label Shimmy Disc and set up the studio Noise New York in New York. And nearly all of the recordings that were released on Shimmy Disc were either produced by Kramer or were recorded at Noise New York. Now Kramer seemed to have a habit of falling out with people, maybe quite a difficult character. The reason why Shimmy Disc came to an end was a lawsuit that Ann Magnuson, who was a member of a band, Bong Water, with Kramer, who I'll just mention just in a few moments. And that lawsuit bankrupted Shimmy Disc. I think he also fell out with Jad Fair of Harp Japanese as well. So just putting Shimmy Disc in its context of the sort of late 80s and 1990s music, let's just think what was happening in rock music at the time. Bands like Sonic Youth were still kind of in their prime. College rock was the big thing in the States. And then, of course, there was grunge as well. Over in the UK, there were some really interesting bands like My Bloody Valentine producing fantastic music, Spacemen 3, and bands like New Order were still recording some good music. Also in that decade, you got Britpop, and I guess that really was a media created tag, but it's a tag which has stuck. And I think however much you enjoy, Oasis or those bands, which fair enough, it was an essentially conservative music. And Shimmy Disc, the music on Shimmy Disc doesn't really fit into any of those categories, although the bands that Kramer signed were varied. There wasn't any particular sound. I think that really what comes over most with Shimmy Disc is its willingness to experiment and willingness to try out new things. Although there is, I think, in Kramer's attitude, harking back a little bit to the early underground in music. He did record with Hugh Hopper from the original lineup of the Soft Machine, and also Tully Kupperberg of the Fugs, from the American Underground from the 60s. So there is a little bit of looking back in there, but definitely remoulding psychedelia for the 90s. So all I'm going to do is talk about 5 LPs. So this video isn't too long. Just 5 LPs which represent a taster for Shimmy Disc, which I think really has been kind of unfairly forgotten. So appropriately, this first one I'm going to show is a compilation, a sort of sampler of Shimmy Disc artists, and there's a lot of tracks on here. It's called What Else Do You Do? A compilation of quiet music, and some of the artists on here were Shimmy Disc artists. There's Daniel Johnston, I'll say a bit more about him later. Bong Water, which is Kramer's own band. Dean Wareham of Galaxie 500, of course. He'd gone solo by the time this record was released. Nice sampler, as the title suggests, quiet music. And I'm going to show play a sample or a needle drop of a tune by acoustic tune by Dean Wareham, who was later to go on to form Luna. One of the most prominent bands, or one of the bands which became most noticed from the Shimmy Disc label, was Bong Water. And Bong Water were a duo of Kramer and Ann Magnuson. And Ann Magnuson was a performance artist. She'd previously been in a band called Pulsalama, and they formed in 1987, around the time that the label began. There's a real streak of humour in Bong Water's music, sort of American New York irony. Not just a duo. I mean, that was the main core of the band, but Bong Water also included guests like Fred Frith, Peter Stamfel, and the reason why I've got this Holy Modal Rounders album there in the background is because Peter Stamfel was in the Holy Modal Rounders, a sort of acid folk band of the 60s, and also Fred Schneider of the B-52s. So what's a Bong Water album like? Well, they made several albums. Here's one of them, Breaking No New Ground. One of the best ones is a double, which was called Double Bummer. But my favourite is this one, Too Much Sleep. And this was released in 1989. And there's Kramer and Ann Magnuson. A Bong Water record is a kind of... it's like it follows a dream logic. It seems to be fairly seamless as well, because interspersing the tracks are Ann Magnuson's dream diaries, and it's all very disorientating until you listen to it a few times. They did record a lot of cover versions on these albums, including songs by Dudley Moore, Slap Happy, 13th Floor Elevators, and the Moody Blues as well. But this really is a trip, this album, Too Much Sleep. Again, the sleeve, it is designed by this lovely lettering by underground comic artist Gary Panther. And I'm going to do a needle drop on the track on this album called The Psychedelic Sewing Room. Now, not all of the releases which came out on Shimmy Disc seem to be doomed to obscurity, because Kramer was the first person to record Galaxie 500, and he released, produced and engineered and released Galaxie 500's first album, Today, on Shimmy Disc, and he continued to produce Galaxie 500 when they went on to bigger labels. I think it was Sub Pop in the USA and Rough Trade in the UK, and this is their second album, Galaxie 500's On Fire. It's an absolute classic from the early 90s, I believe. Yeah, I think it was released in 1990, but recorded at Noise New York by Kramer, and liner notes by Kramer. But after Galaxie 500 split, Kramer continued working with Damon and Naomi, and they were the rhythm section of Galaxie 500. Damon Krukowski on drums and Naomi Yang on bass. And this is their first album, released on Shimmy Disc. Lovely album, very acoustic, shimmery sounds, sort of splashing drums, soaring harmonies. Lovely album. They went on, they're still going today. They have their own label called 2020, but this is their first album. More sad hits, and thoroughly recommend this one. Do look out for this one. Damon and Naomi. And on to Daniel Johnston. Well, Daniel Johnston, who sadly died last September, is probably, apart from Galaxie 500, the most well-known artist that recorded on Shimmy Disc. And Daniel Johnston, who as an American singer-songwriter, regarded as a very significant figure in the sort of outsider lo-fi genre of music, and most of his early work was released on cassette, self-released on cassette. known for its childlike quality. But no doubt about it, Daniel Johnston was a wonderful songwriter, very raw emotions displayed, and a lot of people have covered his songs as he came to prominence in the early 90s. I think it was Kurt Cobain who was wearing a Daniel Johnston t-shirt, and that brought, of course, in the grunge era, Daniel Johnston's name to many people who wanted to investigate who he was, who he is. This album, 1990, was recorded and engineered again at Noise, New York by Kramer, and it was the first time that Daniel Johnston had recorded a record in a proper record studio. And despite it being called 1990, the album was recorded in 1988. It was originally going to be called 1989, but it didn't come out till 1990. I'm just going to play you a short track now from this album.
I was living in a devil town, didn't know it was a devil town. Oh Lord, it really brings me down about the devil town. And all my friends were vampires, didn't know they were vampires. Turns out I was a vampire myself in the devil town.
Finally, the fifth album I'm going to show, recorded on Shimmy Disc, is a band which Kramer was in, probably the most rocking band out of all the releases that Kramer was involved with on Shimmy Disc. This band was called Ball, and this is the fourth album by Ball. Very kind of freewheeling, loose rocking trio of Don Fleming, Jay Spiegel. Kramer was the bass player in this band. Probably the closest that Kramer and Shimmy Disc came to grunge. I did actually see Ball live when they toured the UK back in the early 90s, and it was an anarchic show, to say the least. But Kramer's bass playing style reminded me a bit of Tony Visconti on The Man Who Sold the World, Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World. Quite an unusual style, but so that's Ball. That brings to an end this overview of the label Shimmy Disc. I'll probably do some other overviews of independent labels in the future on this channel, but just an honorary mention before I sign off. The only British band, I think, that recorded on Shimmy Disc were Liverpool's Walking Seeds, and this is their album Bad Orb Whirling Ball. When was this recorded? 1989. Produced and engineered by Kramer at Noise, New York, October 1989. This was released on Shimmy Disc in the States, but this is the UK version, so it didn't really qualify really for this video. It was released on Paper House Records in the UK. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching as ever. Thanks for your subscriptions. Thanks for your comments. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.